Welcome back to the channel, you guys, and happy Pride Month. It is Comic Kid here again, and today, if you clicked on the video, you obviously know we are talking about the best LGBTQ plus stories from both DC and Marvel Comics. Now, before we get started, yes, I have been gone for a while, but I was busy doing adult things and catching up on a lot of reading and watching a lot of TV and being depressed and anxious and trying to get over that. So I took a little bit of a break from the internet and posting and mostly everything, but I am back and I am super excited to talk about this list here today. Now, everything featured on this list will be specific to DC and Marvel, and admittedly it is very heavy DC. And the reason is I do tend to drift more DC, and so I read more DC, and therefore I get exposed to more DC and end up liking more DC than Marvel. But again, no hate against Marvel, that's just kind of how my brain works. And I've also thought about doing a 10 best LGBTQ plus comics for the indie side as well. So if y'all would like to see that, then be sure to let me know down in the comments section below. But without any further ado, we will go ahead and get started here. Now, kicking things off, and in absolutely no particular order, we have the Iceman series from 2017. And essentially following the events of All New X-Men, the adult Bobby Drake is kind of off on his own for a little bit while he kind of reevaluates his life and takes a deeper look at himself as well. Now, when this series initially came out, a lot of people didn't really like the change to a character who's been as established as long as Iceman has, but I feel like both the Bendis run and this series by Sina Grace both do a good job of kind of maintaining that classic Iceman character while still making the appropriate changes given the story at hand. Now, despite the hate that this book has gotten from the haters, I actually think it's not too bad. And I do know it's out of print in physical form, and so I think the only way you might be able to read it is only on like Marvel Unlimited. I could totally be wrong there, it still may not be available, but if you have a chance to read it and you are a fan of Iceman or the X-Men, then this one would be a good one to pick up. Now, next up on the list we have Batwoman. And really anything by J.H. Williams or Greg Rucka with Batwoman is going to be a wonderful, wonderful story to read. And don't get me wrong, the Rebirth run with Margaret Bennett is still a really, really solid run, but I do feel like J.H. Williams and Greg Rucka did a bit more with the character and really kind of established her role within the overall DC universe, while Margaret Bennett just kind of built off of what they were doing. But even from Detective Comics from before the New 52 and then her solo series in the New 52, most of the Batwoman stuff is going to be absolutely phenomenal, and I probably should have this at the top of the list because this is one of the ones that I would recommend more than some of the others on this list, but oh well. Now, moving on once again, we have Young Avengers. Now, I would recommend the Alan Heinberg run over the Kieran Gillen run just because that's what I prefer, but both are really, really solid, and if you're a fan of the team, then you should like both versions. Personally, I prefer the cast in the Alan Heinberg run a little bit more, and that is kind of what the MCU seems to be establishing as well. But there are some of the same members on both teams, and if you're hoping to get an LGBTQ plus fix, then Wiccan and Hulkling will be on both teams as well. Now, more recently, Hulkling and Wiccan both have had their own solo miniseries. I believe it's part of the Empire event. I could be wrong there, but I want to say they had like a 3-part thing there that you could also just jump in and read. But that one is also a little bit dependent on you reading the rest of the Empire event. But if you're at all curious to see these two characters together, or you just want a little bit more info about Wiccan from WandaVision, then both of these stories, or rather all 3 of them technically, would be great ones to pick up as well. Next up on the list though, we have Poison Ivy, The Cycle of Life and Death. Now, I absolutely love this story. Poison Ivy is one of my favorite villains, and Amy Chu just does a fantastic job crafting this story. Now, it is certainly elevated immensely by Clayman's art, who is easily one of the best artists working in comics right now, at least in my opinion. And so just everything about this story is incredibly fun, well told, serious. It's got a lot of supporting characters. There's just things that make perfect sense about Poison Ivy in this one as well. And it really helps shine a new light on the character. Now, at the time of me recording this, the new one from G. Willow Wilson has also come out, featuring art by Marcio Takara, and having just read the first issue alone, it is off to a really solid start as well. Now, this one is specifically carrying the Pride banner from DC Comics on its cover, and so reading the first issue, you get a little bit of her relationship with Harley, but it does not seem to be the focus of the story, at least yet in issue 1. But again, I feel like Poison Ivy Cycle of Life and Death is out of print, and so if you have the DC Universe app, I believe it's on there, and if you can check it out, I highly recommend it. And be sure to check out the new one from G. Willow Wilson as well. Marking the halfway point here, we have Loki. And in regards to Loki, I would recommend both the Agent of Asgard series and the Vote Loki series. If you've seen the Loki TV show, then you would know that it pulls pretty heavily from both of these, and both are very solid stories all around and overall. Now, I would say that I do prefer Agent of Asgard overall, but it is longer, and Al Ewing is just an incredible author as well, and so I would say I recommend that one over Vote Loki, but both are going to be recommended here today. Leading into the back half of the list, we have Far Sector. Now, Far Sector is one of the last, if not the last, DC Comics series to get the Young Animal imprint, which was overseen by Gerard Way. And the story itself does only run for 12 issues, and so if you're looking for a nice one-and-done story that does continue the journey of Sojourner Mullane, I hope I'm saying that right, that's just kind of how I read it, but Far Sector is great. Like I said, it is a one and done, but there is more with the character afterwards, and it does seem like they're setting her up to be a bigger role in the DC universe as Dark Crisis kind of starts to merge into the future state stuff. But author N.K. Jemisin does a great job with this story overall, and most of the Young Animal stuff was actually excellent. And I do believe this one is actually still in print as well, so if you can buy a physical copy and if that's your preferred method of reading, I do believe it is still available for most shops to order as well. Now, next up on the list, as what should be no surprise to anyone, is Wonder Woman. Now, there are actually several Wonder Woman stories that I'm going to talk about here today, and each of them kind of has their own pros and cons, but in terms of my least favorite of the three that I'll talk about, Wonder Woman, the True Amazon is a reimagining of Diana's origin story by Jill Thompson. She both wrote and illustrated the book, and it is some truly phenomenal art. It's almost told as like a children's story, but does feature some more adult elements as well. The only thing that I didn't really care for about this story, and this is a spoiler, but Diana is very much a spoiled brat in her upbringing. But I did also appreciate kind of how this story takes that element of Diana's reimagined character and comes full circle to establish her as the Wonder Woman that most people know and love. And so in terms of origin stories for Wonder Woman, I do think it's one of the weaker ones, but it still has some great elements of representation in there as well. Now, next up, and probably one of the more rocky picks, is going to be Wonder Woman Earth 1. This is the first Wonder Woman story that I remember reading that really kind of pushed the suggestion that the Amazons are all gay, and it definitely makes sense given the nature of their setup and all that as well. And it may not be the first to do this, but I do remember this is one of the stories that kind of caused a whole bunch of brouhaha. Now, it is considered a bit more controversial for other reasons as well, and again, I don't think it's the best origin story out there for Diana, but people are very hit or miss on this story, and so if you're at all curious to check it out, it is not a canon interpretation of her origin by any means, and so it might be worth a shot. And then the last Wonder Woman story that I want to talk about here is The Legend of Wonder Woman. Now, this story is by Renee DeLiz, and if I'm not mistaken, was actually supposed to go on longer than it did, or get like a book 2 or something or other, but was cancelled for some reason that I am unfamiliar with. But this story is my favorite origin story for Wonder Woman. Everything about this, from the art, which is also by Renee DeLiz, all the way to the actual narrative that it's telling, just fits Wonder Woman so well in my opinion. And so if you get a chance to check this one out as well, this is easily one of my must-read Wonder Woman stories, and so be sure to check this one out if any. Now, kicking off the top 3, we have the recent Son of Kal-El series from Tom Taylor. Now, Tom Taylor is certainly one of the hottest writers in the business right now, and it seems like everything he touches turns to gold. Like, the man can, like, do no wrong, it seems. And Son of Kal-El is no exception. He is not only telling a wonderful, wonderful Superman story, but he's also approaching representation and John's bisexuality in a wonderful, wonderful way as well. I would say that the only problem with Tom Taylor's run is that if you pick it up from book 1 and just don't know who John is, you've got a little bit of catching up to do. It does kind of fill in the gaps for you, but ever since John was introduced, he's gone through some pretty major changes, including like being aged up and then suddenly becoming Superman and so on, time with the Legion and stuff like that as well. And so you get a lot of stuff that they mention in this series that you might not get from the actual series. And so book 1 is not exactly the best jumping on point, but it does give you plenty of information to enjoy the story, even though you might be slightly confused or slightly lost. Now, in the number 2 spot, we have my boy John Constantine. Now, I have loved Constantine probably since the movie came out with Keanu Reeves, and I recognize that that one is significantly different from the comic book one, but it really kind of kicked off my interest in the character. And I gotta mention the original Hellblazer run just because it's so iconic and it's so good, but he really doesn't kind of get into his sexuality until a little bit later in the series. I will also recommend the James Tynion Constantine the Hellblazer run as well. Tynion himself is bisexual, and so you do get a bit more modern / authentic representation with John in this story as well. I will say book 1 is significantly stronger than book 2, but Tynion's Constantine run is a great jumping on point for new readers to Constantine, while also still paying homage to some of the older elements that got him to where he's at now. Some of the other newer Constantine stories just kind of fail to capture that same magic, but I will say I feel like Tynion did a good job. Now, in the number 1 spot, as many of you can probably guess by now because we have not talked about her, is going to be Harley. Now, there are several stories over the years that feature both Harley and Ivy, and I gotta recommend the one by Harley's creator, Paul Dini, with art by Bruce Timm, and then there's the more recent Jody Houser one with art by Adriana Mello. Now, both of these stories specifically are kind of like one-and-dones. The Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy one does kind of continue the Heroes in Crisis story with Ivy and kind of sets up the Fear State version of Ivy, but both are great stories featuring the two characters together. Now, in regards to Harley Quinn specifically, because we did already talk about Poison Ivy specifically, easily one of my favorite recommendations for her as a character is going to be Harleen by Stepan Sejic. It is a modern retelling of her origin story that does explore the character's sexuality a little bit, but it's really a great, darker, deep dive into the character with phenomenal storytelling and art from Seijik. And so if you're looking for the two of them together, these should be some great stories to get you started. And then if you're looking for just a wonderful, wonderful Harley Quinn story, I cannot recommend Harleen enough. But that is it for today, you guys. As always, thank y'all so much for watching. Be sure to hit like and subscribe, and don't forget to let me know what some of your favorite LGBTQ+ stories are down in the comments section below. I'm always curious to see what you guys say and just see if I have or haven't read anything. But that is it for today, y'all. I am super excited to be back, and I will be seeing y'all again real soon.